Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this latest Food for Media webinar, What Do Food Editors Want? I'm Henry Hemming, Managing Director at Food for Media. Great to have you here today. We're expecting a really good turnout. We had over 100 registrations from top food and drinks PR professionals for today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our elite panelists for today's session so that they can say hello. I've got a few messages for you and then we can get cracking. So we have with us today Andrew Ellson, Consumer Affairs Correspondent from The Times. Andrew, great to have you with us. Helena Lang, the Editor-in-Chief indeed. Helena Lang, Editor-in-Chief of Sainsbury's magazine. Great to have you here, Helena.
Hi, Henry.
Very good to
and everyone else.
Yeah. And last, certainly by no means least, Sam Goldsmith, who is a food editor, life and style at Homes across a plethora of titles at Future Publishing. And I will list many of Sam's titles when we introduce him later. Great to have you here with us, Sam.
Thanks.
Good, fantastic. Well, as I said, this is the latest webinar in the Food for Media series. We had What Do Food and Drink Editors Want last time. It's been very successful, so I'm sure this is something we'll keep going as the year progresses. I hope before long we will meet you face to face for one of these sessions. Roll on that day. It can't be too long, he says, hopefully. We have the opportunity, of course, for you today to pitch questions to our panelists, so do use Zoom's Q&A functionality at the bottom of the screen to place your questions. Please think about them now and we'll cover off as many as possible. I'm glad to say I did have a lot of really great questions in advance from Food for Media subscribers, and thank you so much to everyone who wrote into me, and I'm going to also try and cover as many of those as possible. If you're feeling social, we're hashtag Food for Media Meets and at Food for Media, Twitter and Instagram. It'd be lovely to hear your comments. And if you look at previous tweets, you'll see I've copied in everyone on the panel as well. So without further ado, let's get going with today's guests on the Food for Media webinar. So Helena Lang has volunteered to chat to you first about her title and her relationship with the food and drink PR sector. So Helena leads several food and lifestyle titles at contract publishers 7, but she's well known for being editor-in-chief at Sainsbury's, which is, I believe, Britain's top-selling food and drink title on newsstands. The Sainsbury's magazine, I hear, is devoted to those affluent, educated customers who love to cook. They don't just have to cook. Helena's background comes in magazine publishing women's lifestyle titles, including Cosmopolitan. She's worked for Psychologies and Red. She did a stint at John Brown working on John Lewis, John Lewis's source title, before she was wooed back, indeed, to work on Sainsbury's magazine as editor-in-chief. So Helena, it's really very kind of you to have joined our panel today. Tell us a little bit about how Sainsbury's magazine comes to life every issue. Tell us a little bit about how you're dealing with the current situation and hopefully life kind of getting back to normal. And indeed, for our audience, tell us about how your team at Sainsbury's works best and most effectively with the PR sector.
Sure. Thanks, Henry, for the introduction. So Sainsbury's magazine is a monthly title, and we have a big circulation. And because of that, our print schedule is quite long. So unlike working for a newspaper where you're working very close to deadline, we work quite far in advance. So we've actually already planned the flat plan for our November and December issues. We kind of try and get ahead with Christmas, particularly because they tend to be our bigger, bumper-sized issues with much more content in them and not more people to do the work, as always. So we try and get a bit ahead with those. So generally, we start planning an issue 3 months in advance. And when I say plan an issue, I'm not talking about the kind of newsy product pages. I'm talking about the kind of big picture, big features, you know, what are the themes, etc. We have a cookery team who develop and test a lot of recipes for the magazine. in fact, all the recipes for the magazine. And they also work very closely with a lot of food contributors, writers, as well as top chefs. And we work with a lot of restaurants on developing menus and recipes that our readers can use. When it comes to food and drink products, we have news pages scattered throughout the magazine, and we have separate editors that produce those for us. And they can be produced far closer to deadline, because there's often an issue with, a product being signed off to appear on shelves in store quite close to when it's going to happen. So we allow a bit of leeway about that, with that kind of thing. In addition, within the magazine, we have a lot of lifestyle content, and there's some key big areas of interest to our readers. So one is travel. We have more travel pages than any of our competitors in normal circumstances. Obviously, during the pandemic, we've cut that back. We've had a little bit of travel content, but we've cut that back, but we're starting to reintroduce that now, though not to Spain, I hasten to add. We also have a lot of health content. Our readers are generally, the average age of our reader is 47. And that's skewed by a lot of readers who are empty nesters or with older children. So they have more time on their hands to cook and entertain their friends and kind of develop their passion for cooking. And then it's kind of at the other end of the spectrum. We have a lot of, a growing number of young foodie urban couples who are setting up home together and developing a passion for cooking and eating healthily. And they're looking for inspiration to do that. What we don't focus on are young families, particularly. They're not excluded from the title at all, but in all of our experience, people with young children at home do not have time to cook, long, detailed, complicated recipes. We call those the pasta pesto years, and they kind of be much more focused on convenience cooking, on quick cooking. So our readers are very interested in health. Travel, as I say, health is of increasing importance, particularly during this time. We're seeing a lot of search online at the magazine website for healthy recipes. People, are kind of embracing this new government campaign about losing weight, getting trim, getting into shape, and they need help and support in being able to do that. And we want to be there for them to do that. Another key area of interest is the kitchen. So that's the hub of our readers' home, and it's where they live out a lot of their family life, and they like their kitchens to be beautiful, and they want them to have character, and they want them to have, great equipment in them, and we talk to them about that. And finally, another growing key area of interest, and one that's very popular for our audience, is the UK. We have a big section called The Best of British, which focuses on our country's great food heritage, the beautiful products we develop in the UK, from cheese to whiskey to beer to, all the different fruit and veg that we grow. And also on travel, on the great, gastropub heritage we have, on beautiful places to stay. And we wrap that up in a section called Best of British, as I say, and that's actually one of the most popular areas of the magazine. So how we work with PRs, we work with PRs constantly and consistently. We work best with PRs when they can deliver us a really good idea that will trigger off a feature that we can produce. They can contact the food team with appropriate information. A lot of PRs come straight to me, and I can forward, if I think the product or the idea is relevant, onto the relevant person. But I think what would improve things going forward, as we're all more time stretched in this current way of working, is if PR companies really got to know the right person to talk to on a title and developed relationships individually with them, rather than kind of firing off, press releases to everybody, one and all. I think that would be a great way to start working. And I think that's it. I think I've covered everything off that I wanted to say.
Time for more efficient targeting of press releases rather than the kind of cannonball approach.
Yeah.
Great, Helena. Well, thank you for those remarks. I've got a lot of questions which will already be pertinent, but I'm going to hold them back till we've heard from all of our panelists. Let's turn to Sam next. So Sam Goldsmith at Future. With Sam's CV, it's a bit like what hasn't Sam done? And I could have perhaps approached describing Sam in that way, but I will just say that Sam is food editor across the life and style and homes portfolio at Future. Future, Britain's largest publisher, has recently acquired TI Media, which ran these titles before. So Sam oversees food on Woman and Home, Woman's Weekly, Ideal Home, Living, etc., Country Homes and Interiors, and others. He's had over 10 years experience as writer, editor, educator, and cook. Nicely summarized, I think that. He's got a lot of background in recipes and styling food, styling shoots. He's written for Australian Delicious, the Lad Bible Group. He's helped launch a coffee app, Best Coffee. He's worked with the Hairy Bikers. Did you have to don a beard for that? I'm not sure, but he worked.
Fortunately not.
Fortunately not. Okay, that's fine. But you've developed one since, which is good. While working as a sous chef alongside Orlando Marin, he has also worked in mainstream food titles such as, or written for BBC Good Food, Delicious Olive. He's also joined the Guild of Food Writers. You see what I mean about what's left out. So
hopefully it's not jack of all trades. So.
No, I was not going to say that.
No, I know. I'm saying more for me, Mike. That's what it sounds like.
Sam, tell us about your life in food. Tell us about how Future's titles arrive at their food content across obviously a huge spectrum of titles. What kind of piques your interest? What are you looking out for, and how do you work with the PRs out there in the food and drink sector?
Yeah, I guess ours is slightly different in that we're hubbed at Future, so we don't really see the whole process of each magazine being created. So we are very much just looking at the food content. So as you say, those are quite a lot of titles. There are, for us, it's mainly the shooting of the recipes. We do lift quite a lot of cookbook recipes as well on different titles, and then product pages as well. So I think for us, Helena mentioned about features. We don't really tend to write features very much. So sometimes PRs contact us asking whether we at different angles for the feature, which we can't often do. So I guess for the PRs wanting to know how they can kind of help with Future, it's more, as I say, product pages. We don't have a lot of product pages anymore because we don't have Feel Good Food. It was a victim of coronavirus, unfortunately. Woman and Woman's Own are the ones where we have most of our product pages. And actually what's quite interesting about those is that they're the favourite pages for the readers as well. So they are very kind of protected by the editors. So I think we're always looking for things that the readers want. So I would say that if the PRs can pick up a copy of the magazine, have a look at who they think the readers are, and then kind of target us based on that. But we plan about 6 months in advance for the monthlies. So Woman and Home, Ideal Home, Country Homes and Interiors. What else? We've got Style at Home, Living, etc., Homes and Gardens. And then the weeklies were about maybe 2 to 4 months ahead. So that would be Woman, Woman's Own. I'm just reading them because there's so many. Woman's Weekly, Chat, and then all the weekly specials as well, like our Healthy Living series, etc. And then our online as well. So we do goodtoknow.co.uk and womanandhome.com. And those ones are much quicker. So we tend to be working on a weekly basis for the online titles. So I guess it's things like I'll quite often get barbecue things on or at summer time, which is great for online, but then I can't really do anything with those during the month. So like now, I mean, as everybody is, we're getting barbecue titles and Christmas titles, which is great for the monthlies, obviously. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I haven't covered that you might want to know about our titles. Yeah, I guess for us, really, it's just about keeping in touch quite regularly with the PRs. I know I'm horrendous at replying to emails at times, but I do try to reply. I think if they're more personal, it's really helpful as well. Mainly helpful for them because it makes me feel guilty if I haven't replied. But also just check that because I actually used to do a little bit of PR before I took this job, and I would say things like updating your contact lists and making sure that you're contacting me about food. So quite often I'll get baby things or watches or fashion, but obviously we don't at Future, sorry, not TI, we don't really work across teams with just solely food. So that kind of thing helps a lot as well. Just making sure that you're contacting the right person. And then I think you mentioned about how we were kind of working in the current times of coronavirus.
Yeah.
To be honest, not a lot has changed. We're still working pretty much in the same way. We're not shooting as much. We're using probably more PR recipes, actually. It's quite interesting. There's some PRs do a lot of, that have got suitable products, obviously do a lot of PR recipes. But that's definitely something that we're picking up more in the weekly titles. I'd say like Chat, Woman and Woman's Own. We do a lot more recipes. Whereas in Woman and Home and Woman's Weekly, we always shoot our content, or the majority of our content is shot in-house. But there's still some opportunity there for PRs in that we will do some kind of not product placement, but we might include, I don't know, like the Creuset or Staub or certain props we can include in the shots. So there are opportunities there as well. But really, it's just kind of starting that dialogue, I think, with us about how, and I think like Helena said, with the contacting the right person in the team, so there's 5 of us on the team, and we kind of all plan the content together, but we don't always work on every single title. I think on most media databases, we try and say which titles we work on, but we don't always have that correct. But you can contact any one of us and we'll always point you in the right direction.
So Sam, apart from someone starting an email to you, dear Sam, you're a lovely person and a brilliant journalist, what really gets cut through with you? Is it the word new? Is it someone saying, we've launched this, we don't think anyone's done it before? Or is it more that someone showing they're on trend, or whatever people say, that they've got something that is going to go down well with the British public? Yeah,
I guess if it's obvious that they've looked at the magazine, that's really helpful. Sometimes people might contact us about a certain feature and say, oh, I think it would be great in here, and the feature hasn't been running for like 2 years or something. But it's a tricky one, because sometimes we're looking for new things, but sometimes we're just looking for great food and drink products that may have been out for years, but we think that they'd be good. So for example, I don't know, a recent one, I think last Christmas, for example, we worked with Bailey's, I think, and we did a Bailey's pudding as part of the big shoot in Woman and Home. So that's not a brand new product, but we still used it. I think in the email situation, it's really tricky, because I think we were talking earlier before the seminar started about what we look for in emails, but sometimes it's literally just, I open it at the right time, which I know is really not very helpful for people watching, because you can't judge on what time when I'm going to open the emails. But I think the more kind of information that's relevant to us is what really helps, rather than kind of sending us stuff that we're just going to overlook and delete because it's just not relevant at all, and we can't include it in the pages. I'd say, if that's helpful.
Good. All right, well, we'll come back to the subject email subject fields a little bit later, but let me now introduce our third panelist today, Andrew Ellson from The Times. So Andrew is the Consumer Affairs Correspondent at The Times. He's worked with the newspaper for over 15 years, worked his way up, news editor, personal finance editor, and in his current role, he covers subjects from supermarket, retail, property and food trends through to exposing malpractice in industry. So something of a maverick role. But in amongst that, I've been reading Andrew's recent output, there's a very clear interest, I think, that he communicates in the whole food and drink sector, and some lovely recent features, on everything from gourmet salt, paper-made wine bottles. God, I've been waiting for that story. I can drink with less guilt. Bars having trouble keeping flirty customers more than a lips width apart, and finally two fun things. The news that we're all drilling holes in our kitchens, not to reach Australia but to build a wine cellar. That was an interesting one. And finally, that we're turning that Britain's favourite pastimes at the moment are rum, good for an epidemic, and vegan barbecues. And we've got a lot of questions on vegan and vegetarian coming up. Andrew, fascinating output. Tell us a little bit more about your role and how you arrive at your stories.
Well, hi Henry, and thanks for inviting me. Yes, a just slightly different role to the other food and drink editors, as I cover a large area that isn't just food and drink. Other areas such as gambling, insurance, mortgages, property, etc. Nonetheless, it is still a significant part of my job. The other main difference is I only really do news, so I'm only really writing for what we call the front of the book, the news pages of the paper, which means that everything I do is going to probably be a maximum of 500 words long. And the main issue there is you're in intense competition with other stories to get in. If you think about the Times, obviously we have a website, but it's still mainly driven by stories that go into the paper. They'll then appear on the website and in the iPad edition. And it's a particularly high bar. It's difficult to get stories in generally. It's a particularly high bar at the moment because obviously everything that's been happening in the world, coronavirus, etc. Nonetheless, a newspaper requires lots of different types of stories. When I was on the news desk, one of the things that my news editor first taught me was when you're creating a news list, you need what's called light and darkness. Light and darkness. You cannot fill a newspaper full of just misery, death, and destruction. You need some things that it's going to cheer readers up and things that relate to them in their lives and they want to hear about. So, and that's where often these sort of stories that are relevant to food and drink PRs may come in. So you need, but nonetheless, it's still difficult. And another problem we face is, you imagine you've got 22 pages an average day of a home news run. Think of all the stories that have got to go in there. You've got your politics, you've got your corona, you've got everything else that's going in. There's only going to be a very small number of slots, and so it's got to be something quite eye-catching. Usually, if it's a food and drink thing for me, it's got to be related to a wider trend. So, for example, the story you just mentioned about the rum cocktails and the vegan barbecues. The sort of wider angle there was that it's related to people being in lockdown. So more people are entertaining at home, and so they're mixing their own cocktails for friends, and rum is doing very well as a result of that. And obviously, vegan barbecues is an extension of the wider social trend away from meat products. So that's how that got in. Another example I did before was. I think it's very rarely I do a new product launch, but there was a dog food that had been made from insect protein, and I did that, and I think that got in the paper. But I think, so the wider hook with that was the environmental angle of, quite interesting that insect protein is so much more efficient, uses less water, less land, less carbon. So that gave it an extra angle. So this is the type of thing that I'll be looking for in stories. It's really about what's the other angle. And another important thing is the story's got to be, we call it in the business, not puffy. So it's very, very difficult. It's a fine line, and of course, lots of stories. You'll still get accused of that by readers. So, for example, the rum and vegan barbecue story that I mentioned below the line, which is something we shouldn't really do as journalists, for our egos. And I was accused of writing an editorial for Waitrose. You're always going to get that criticism, but it means that there is a higher bar in the news pages, and you have to. So you very, very rarely I'll write about a new product, but I will write about things if I think it's part of a trend. And so it's very, very, if it looks like a promotion for a single product, it's very, very unlikely to run. I'm not going to pitch it, and the news editors aren't going to accept it. You know, so you have to be creative in how you pitch, I suppose, is the advice I give. It needs to be part of this wider product or social trend. I don't know, say if you're promoting a chocolate bar, I mean, you could say, I don't know, demand for this product is growing because divorces are going up at the moment and people are comfort eating. You know, it's something like that. That's a sort of, you know, much more likely to then write about that chocolate bar because there's something attached to it that I can do. Also, in terms of stories, it's always very useful to have sales figures. They really help and can be a hook for a story. I don't necessarily mean, you know, exact numbers, percentage change. Yeah. But I will need that. So there's been a 40% uplift in this product over this 3-month period compared to last year, for example. I don't want to know exactly how many millions you're making from it. I don't need that, but I need some indication. That's always useful. And quotes, again, quotes need to be not necessarily about the product. If they're going to be about the product, and how great it is, they're unlikely to make, and that won't go in. They'll have to be in that context of the wider social trend that I may be trying to identify in the story. The other thing is pictures are massively important as well. There needs to be good pictures, and for example, page 3 of the Times, which is a lot more effort is put into that stories on that page than probably any other part of the paper. And so you need to have great pictures there, and they need to have humans in. So there needs to be a sort of a human angle, not just a product as well. So, for example, I think I had a story about English fizz, and we obviously couldn't just have a bottle of Chapeldown English sparkling wine, but we had a picture of, I think, somebody on the South Downs tending the vines, and that brings a human element to it. So that's the sort of thing that's quite important as well. Quick note on emails, because you mentioned it before. I'm sure PRs probably think journalists are incredibly rude by ignoring all their emails. I can only apologise for that. I'm sure it's very frustrating and annoying. But I'll say the context in which this is happening. In my case, on an average day, I can be getting between 400 and 500 emails a day, in addition to having to do all my other work. If I had to reply to all of them, I just wouldn't be able to do anything else. So it's simply not feasible. And the sad reality is that I am judging emails whether I open them on the subject line alone. So it's got to have a catchy subject line. I will read a subject line, but there's no guarantee that that's going to get me to click in. And sadly, the vast majority of emails I won't reply to, and I do feel a bit bad about that. But that's just the nature of the job. Don't take it personally. Never take it personally. The other thing we get a lot of pitches on is surveys, which, again, it has to be a very, very high bar for a survey, and you have to be willing to share the methodology. It has to come under a little bit of scrutiny. You have to probably share all the data, because it may be that I can see a story in some part of the data that you've not shared. And so there has to be a degree of flexibility with that, and it has to be a credible survey as well. That's very important. So I don't know, and again, that you'll have to link to a wider trend. So just off the top of my head, thinking, if it was a soap product, for example, if something that might make it interesting is soap sales in France have overtaken Britain, because it plays on a stereotype, and you might be able to get a fun story out of that. In terms of when to pitch, again, it's very, very difficult to say. I'm busy quite a lot of the time, but the way that the Times works, I'll run you through how it works. Every day there's a morning news conference and an afternoon news conference. So the morning news conference at the moment is at 10:30 because of Corona. It was previously 11. And afternoon is currently 3:30, and it was at 4 p.m. So I would be expected on most days to put something up for morning conference, or if I haven't for morning, certainly for afternoon. So you'd need to come to me before then. Probably the best time is to give me something a day in advance, to give me a bit of advance notice. And if I think it's good enough, I will pitch it to the news editors. They will then decide whether it goes on the news list. So you've got that extra bar, and then from then you've got the extra bar of it being pitched to the editor. He may not like it, and then even if he likes it, there's no guarantee it's going to make the paper. So it's a very difficult process to get through, but giving a bit of time in advance. Exclusives are also very, very helpful. If you say, I've got this data, I've got this survey, I've got this idea, I'm giving it to you exclusively, I'm much more likely to be interested in that than something that's more widely out, that goes out there. A really good day for food and drinks trend stories is Friday for Saturday. Saturday's our biggest selling paper. It's also got a slightly more consumery feel, and there's more demand for sort of lifestyle pieces because it's the weekend. So they work really, really well. And in that case, it's planned earlier. So the first Saturday conference is on Wednesday, and there's another one on Thursday, and of course on a Friday. So if you're thinking, if you've got something really, really good, again, it's a higher bar for Saturday paper because of the high circulation and the focus on it. If you've got something really good you think might work for that, get it to me early in the week, a Monday and a Tuesday, and I can pitch it for then. Yeah, so I think that's. But the other thing to say is I've seen some research on readers at the Times like, and they really do love. They lap up alcohol stories. I know that, which is why I pitched quite a few of them. You know, the wine sellers, and obviously it's a generally an upmarket readership. So Waitrose type stories are the sort of thing that go well, aspirational and high end food, cookery. Some gadgets as well, but it'd have to be a particularly interesting trend to make paper. So hopefully that'll give you a good summary of what I do, and is useful to some extent to you guys.
Terrific, Andrew. I mean, I think what came across to me really clearly there is that PRs need to think of pitching stories about how their subsector of the entire industry is taking off, is seeing something, rather than going in with a very product-centric angle, me. It's more about this is the next new phase in the way that Brits eat at home or how they spend their money on.
Yeah, exactly. And but you know, I may be different in that approach to Sainsbury's magazine and others, but for me specifically, and the Times, and probably to some extent other newspapers, yes, I think that's a very, very important thing.
And the way their brand might survive in the story is either stats, high quality, you know, arresting quotes, sound bites, and photography. Yeah, that's really, really helpful. Thank you very much, Andrew. Okay. Right, well, I've got a lot of questions to get through, so let's get cracking. I'm going to start with an interesting one from Jane Michotte from Rawlings and Partners. So she says there are huge consumer trends in becoming vegetarian and vegan. Much of this is driven by our interest in sustainable diets. Although we're seeing more and more on vegetarian and vegan recipes, we're yet to see recipes based on carbon footprints. And is that something that's going to change on food pages? So, you know, can you do a fact box around the carbon footprint of the recipe that you've created? Or is it just an impossibility and you'll be torn apart based on your facts? I'll start with Helena on that one.
Our readers are interested in sustainability, but they're probably not as interested in that at present with regards to their recipes as they are in how it tastes, how it looks, and also generally with the nutritionals. So we spend a lot of time and money working out nutritionals, recipes, and that's not something that I see as doing at present, no. I also just want to slightly pick up on the vegan and vegetarian aspect, because yes, there is a big trend in that, but only within a very small group of people. And I think, yes, a lot more people have become vegan or eating more vegetarian foods, but actually the demographic of those who are doing that is relatively small. So by far the majority of people, and our readers definitely, are not vegetarian, they're not vegan, they are increasingly flexitarian, but they're not those people.
Yeah, they may be trying it for a couple of meals a week, that sort of point taken and fairly made. Sam, do you have a view on kind of carbon footprint maps and facts?
I mean, I don't think it's something we'll be doing anytime soon. Our research suggests that our readers are really interested in sustainability. But that's probably more about where the product's coming from. So maybe they might buy local produce, but I'm not sure that they'd be that interested in us telling them. And actually, I think it'd be very difficult because you might be buying something from Yorkshire, in Yorkshire, and the carbon footprint's tiny. But it's not just about how the product's made; it's also where they're getting it from, and they're all buying it from all over the country. And I agree as well about the vegetarian and vegan thing. I think our readers do want the recipes, but they don't want them kind of every week. But we're actually finding, I mean, it's slightly different, but we're finding more so that they're interested in special diets like gluten-free and low sugar rather than the vegetarian and vegan.
Yeah. Andrew, do you have a thought there, maybe in terms of, you know, food coming in internationally? Is the story about ethically sourced more than carbon footprint, or do you have a view?
It's probably a little bit of both, really. I mean, in terms of my perspective, I could actually see a news story based on the carbon footprint of different classic meals. You know, if there was something interesting in it, for example, if your Sunday roast is apparently, I don't know, 5 times worse for the environment than spag bol. I don't know necessarily why it would be, but actually I could see a news story in that.
Yeah.
Because it would sort of be quite interesting, but it'd have to, you know, I could see the difficulty in getting that data, making it reliable. But there's definite interest in the news pages across all of these trends, across the, you know, flexitarianism and sustainability and the environment and animal welfare, and all these things are of interest, I think, to our readers. And but of course, we wouldn't be necessarily putting recipes in. We might put a recipe in as a panel on a story, but yeah.
Okay, no, fair enough. Okay, moving on. Belinda Clark, who her site is belindaclark.co.uk. She's the face of gourmet marshmallows. She said, Christmas confectionery. What would the panel look for in kind of you know, really exciting confectionery products for Christmas? Is it novel flavors? Is it attractive packaging? Is it recycling? Helena, do you have a thought on that confectionery?
Yes, I mean, something that Andrew touched on. Firstly, I'd look for, we need good images. You know, we're not going to shoot product, so we need the PR to supply really good product shots, preferably cutouts, but also some kind of lifestyle image as well, just in case. And then, yeah, interesting new flavors. For us, any food product, and it's only food and drink products, must be stocked in Sainsbury's. So please don't email me about new things in Ocado or Tesco, because that just is slightly annoying. With other areas, we can use products from elsewhere, but for food and drink, it has to be from Sainsbury's. But yeah, exciting new flavors, something that looks gorgeous and attractive on the page, really are the primary concerns.
And are images the biggest driver for you? Emotionally, is that what gets you to make a decision on something?
It's the first thing that gets us to make a decision. If there's no image, it's not going in the magazine.
Lovely. That's a great soundbite in itself. Thank you. Sam, any thoughts on lovely Christmas confectionery and what would get your interest?
I mean, I'd agree with that as well. Yeah, really. It's a lot of it's the imagery. I think, I mean, just for use for the PRs, with us, that Holmes titles much prefer the lifestyle images. And lifestyle magazines tend to prefer the cutouts. That's not always the, like, you know, it's not black and white, but it's pretty much the case. Yeah. And yeah, I think that it's got to be kind of novel, I guess, as your questioner asked, but also it's got to taste good as well. I think we wouldn't put anything in that was terrible. And so with that, I mean, samples are obviously useful. Most of our pages now come as kind of what we call test kitchen approved. So we do tend to need to taste them. So if samples aren't ready, that's quite frustrating. And also, yeah, if images aren't ready. So we're doing our Christmas taste tests at the moment, and Ideal Home Christmas Guide, I think for me, my deadline's Friday. And I'm finding that some people are like, yeah, we'd love to be in the magazine, but we can't send anything for a few weeks, or there's no images, or there's no information. So that's quite frustrating at times. But you know, I know that's not always the PR's fault.
Very good. Okay, we've got a question from Polly Robinson, one of Britain's best-known food PRs, works for everything from Michelin-starred chefs to festivals and events. She says, well, she first of all said she's delighted she's re-registered to Food for Media and the quality of journalist alerts are the best ever. Little plug there. I think we're getting 210 in July, which is amazing. She says, do you think there's a shift in consumer, or maybe what is the shift in consumer moods on eating at the moment? Is it towards healthier eating? Is it towards simpler cooking? Or is it looking for small, affordable treats and luxuries? And I'm kind of saying this independently of coronavirus. In general terms, what are the food trends? And Helena, I will ask you to answer that again first, maybe.
I think it's very hard to separate that from the virus, to be honest with you, because pre-virus, our food features were very much driven by food trends and restaurant trends. And obviously with restaurants being shut for so long and people still nervous about eating out, whether that's a good or a bad thing, we're finding that people are wanting more familiar, comforting. There's a lot of nostalgia about food, I think, at the moment. And people want to spoil themselves and their friends at home. Having said that, I think there's a kind of reverse effect as well about eating healthily. And we call it the cake versus quinoa. I mean, it's, you know, one day people are looking for amazing puddings they can make and all stuff their faces with. And the next day that they want something that's, you know, a very green Buddha bowl type piece of inspiration. So I think home cooking and creating that restaurant experience at home, particularly also for couples, we're noticing more and more searches online for kind of date night dinner recipes. So rather than go out for a curry or rather go out for a steak, people are treating themselves at home.
Andrew, any thoughts on trends apart from those you've covered?
Just going back to the previous question, I'd say one thing of interest, I'll come into a second. At the Times, the editor on Christmas stories has a complete fatwa on all Christmas stories before December. So there's no point in anyone sending me Christmas stories. I mean, you know, to be doing Christmas stories in July, it just for me it was just wow. So I just thought I'd make that point. Going back to food trends, I mean, I think I can only comment on the survey evidence I've seen. Obviously, one of the biggest trends at the moment is the flexitarian, vegan, vegetarian one, and that seems to be driven actually more by health concerns from the data I've seen than environmental. It is both, but I think from the survey data, it's health concerns are slightly higher. I think there's a big interest in this amongst the population more widely, maybe certainly amongst Times readers and at the policy level. Obviously, we've seen just this week the new obesity plan from the government. So I think health is a massive issue. Going forward, though, I think cost is going to be another issue. You know, we're going to be entering probably a pretty tough economic time over the next 6 months, a year, possibly longer. And I think value is going to be a key issue as well going forward.
Yeah, very good. Sam, any thoughts on trends for some of your titles? What trends you focus on?
I mean, I think most of it's really been said. We are seeing more interest in the special diets, like I said earlier, like gluten-free, low sugar. But I also think, whilst we might be talking about trends now, I can see that trends are probably going to change. You know, if we have a recession, for example, which is likely, I think we're going to be looking more at store-cupboard ingredients and probably eating in more. I think people might be interested in cooking a bit more since the coronavirus because people have been looking for hobbies. Maybe more diets because of the bit of corona weight that I'm certainly carrying. I'm not sure about everyone else. And so I think it's difficult to say for sure where it's going to go because I think there's so many things that might happen. But yeah, for us, it's the dietary needs, it's entertaining at home, and it's a lot of people, I think, will always love baking. And they look to us, I think, to see about the flavoured trends and maybe new products. But we don't have that many. So actually just on that special dietary needs thing is whilst we might include recipes, we don't have a lot of product pages where we would put in lots of new gluten-free or low sugar products. But where we can, we would. Okay,
very good. I've got an interesting question on when does a chef get noticed in their career? This is from Ellen Manning at EMPR. So at what point do you as journalists start to consider new chefs? Is it because they've suddenly won an award? Is it because they're getting publicity somewhere else? Ellen makes the point that it seems to be the same faces are repeated, the reassuring faces of food. At what point do you notice someone new Maybe Sam, do you want to start that one yourself?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's very much dependent on the title. So I'd say Woman and Home and Woman's Weekly would unlikely pick up somebody who's not well known and who's not a face on the telly. Whereas some like the weeklies like Chat and Woman's Own, if the images are lovely, then we would look to use their cookbook. We don't really do much sort of many news stories about chefs, so we wouldn't really pick up anything there. It would just be cookbook reviews and book lifts, but it is usually it's usually people that are well known. In the Homes titles, we do tend to use more food writers rather than chefs. So in that respect, that's an angle worth trying. For is more like country homes and interiors. I pick up people that aren't necessarily TV chefs.
Yeah. And is it their backstory or how they're cooking? Like when the hairy bikers came along, we noticed them because they were hairy and they were bikers.
Yeah. I think it's really image led, actually, not on the chef, what the chef looks like, but what the product looks like. I'd say the recipes, and it again with our bigger selling magazines, it would be those that we're gonna be able to put on the front cover, and people are going to go, oh, I'll buy that because Mary Berry's in it.
Yeah, very good.
It is a difficult one.
Very good. Helena, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we actually work with a lot of chefs, and we do work with people who are less well known as well as people who are more well known. It's about balance. I would say that obviously we know our audience, and our audience are going to be less interested in some hip, cool, hipster chef cooking street food in Hackney, because that's not their lifestyle. So they're going to be much more interested in young or old chefs cooking at a beautiful gastropub in the middle of the Peak District, serving up delicious new versions of pies. That story, that someone around, who's doing really good work in that area, would be something very interesting to us. So I would say to PRs, it's not about someone being an old hand or a new hand, it's about the story.
Good. A cri de coeur from Anthony Heatley of Cutlass Communications. We're kind of looking for a bit of advice from our panel here on how PR should talk to their clients. He just says the food and drink industry has been heavily impacted by COVID, budgets have been slashed. How does the panel think that PR should go about encouraging their brands to loosen their purse strings and help reignite the food industry? Do you think that's the case, or do you think the food industry will come out of COVID quite well because people won't be able to spend on other things? Any thoughts on that? Helena, maybe first.
Actually, I mean, as everybody knows, supermarkets have done pretty well out of the pandemic, and I think when it comes to food and drink products, sales of wine, beer, champagne, spirits through supermarkets are higher. I mean, it's the off-trade, it's the restaurant and cafe and takeaway industries that have been massively hit, unfortunately. And the ones that have reacted very quickly, I mean, there's lots of places like the Black Swan in Alstead doing home deliveries all over the country now of amazing meal kits. There's these new businesses like Bankist that are working with top Michelin star restaurants to deliver home cooked meals. That's an area that I think will grow and continue to grow. But actually, when it comes to food and drink products in stores, I think they're all in a pretty good place. I mean, there's plenty of brands that are reporting sellouts on products such as flour, sugar, for baking, etc.
Yeah. Andrew, do you agree with that kind of diagnosis of the sector?
Remind me again what the question was.
Well, in what sort of state is the food and drink sector at the moment, and should brands be spending on PR? Is this a good time?
Well, I agree with what Helena said about there's a complete divide between off-trade and supermarket, and I would say there's always a good time if you want to expand and increase the profile of your brand. Then you always should be doing that. But you have to be mindful of what the wider climate is, I suppose. And so, over the next 6 months, promoting products that may be a better value as opposed to the more extravagant things might be might be a good idea. I don't really know enough about that side of it. Obviously, what I would say is food and drink brands should also keep paying for advertising. Otherwise, there won't be that many newspapers left in the end. So I know the supermarkets have been keeping up their advertising. So don't forget adverts, is what I'd say.
Yeah, fair enough. So let's turn to cider. We've got a question from Alistair Morell from Cider is Wine. It's a company, focused on cider sales. He says their sector is worth 150 million in the UK alone. What do we have to do to gain more media coverage and get media on side with cider, whose reputation has surely changed? When I grew up, it was a West Country drink for Wurzels, but it definitely has moved on incredibly. What's your take on cider, Sam? Is it the new wine?
Well, I mean, I am a West Country boy, so I guess I'm always going to be a fan. I think it's a tricky one because it's not. I mean, I don't know. I didn't realise it had gone anywhere. I always thought it was around, but actually, now you've kind of brought it to my attention. We don't really include that much of it. I think it's just about trying to give it to us at the right time, getting us to try it. I'm not sure really what the answer is there. It's quite a tricky one. I think actually even just bringing it to my attention makes me think we should probably include it in our Christmas pages because there are a lot of people that do drink it. Yeah, I think it's kind of just getting it back on the map, but I guess it's kind of our job to do that really, isn't it? I think for me, growing up in the West Country, I did drink a lot of cider, not from like a toddler or anything, but it would kind of be the proper stuff. Whereas I think when I get sent stuff, it's kind of sweet and not great. And it doesn't make me think, oh, our readers would love this. It's kind of, it's just a bit of a sweet, not great alcoholic product. But I think a bit like anything, if it's good quality, it will eventually do well. So I probably just rambled there about cider, but yeah. Thank you. And I will definitely think about that actually. I think is a good one.
Yeah, and I think I grew up on it too. And I think flavoured ciders are coming in. It's quite popular with a certain sort of post-teenage market. Helena, what are your views on the cider market?
Well, I'm very pleased to get a cider question because I can tick that box. In our October issue, we have a 6 or 8 page recipe feature on cooking with cider. Sure. And our readers love cider, and they love cider because, as I mentioned before, but basically because of its heritage, and it reminds them, it's got that nostalgic image of something they used to drink when they were a teenager, or kind of lovely walks in the Somerset countryside. And they love the idea of it. They love the fact that all these new craft ciders are coming through. As mentioned, we can only include brands that are stocked in Sainsbury's. But I think the kind of general movement, particularly with our audience, is to increase the amount of cider they're drinking, and kind of, like I say, experimenting with it in recipes.
Andrew, you're a cider man?
Well, I also grew up in the West Country, so yes, I remember I used to, when I was a teenager, drink a bit too much cider, but don't drink so much of it anymore, unfortunately. In terms of the news pages of the Times, there would have to be some kind of interesting trend that's happening. We've reported a bit on the craft revolution in the spirits market and in beer. I know there's to some extent happening in cider now. Would there be something interesting like I don't know, some company have noticed a huge increase in exports of English cider to Ukraine, or something, just making up on the top of my head, some interesting, different story that's going to sort of pique the interest of me, the news editors, and our readers. That's what it would have to be, I suppose. If there's big increases in demand, they're really noticeable. I'm not talking 1-2% a year, but up 10, 20, 30%. Then that might get me listening and think about the story.
Good, Alistair. I think you've got some good opportunities there. So we've got Tom Savano, which is a kind of cocktail brand. James Kurzek, Tom Savano, said they've launched super premium travel-inspired bottled cocktails. They usually send photos and 2 to 3 paragraph cover email on why the cocktail may work. But he says it's hard getting them noticed, premium cocktails. Sam, any thoughts on that and how he can work?
Yeah, we just don't really have much space for cocktails. If it's with regards to the recipe, then it's really kind of Christmas. We might include a few cocktail recipes, and then very, very occasionally in one of the weeklies we might include one recipe, but it doesn't happen very often. It used to happen more in some of our older titles, and I'm trying to think if it's product with regards to like a tinned cocktail or cocktail in a.
They are ready to drink.
Yeah, then it's just about getting us at the right time. So with, I guess summertime is probably the best for those. Yep. We didn't have any product pages for that kind of thing this year, so we wouldn't have picked anything up. And then Christmas, we're currently doing our taste tests. So Rose Fuchs on our team is organising those, and we just send them in and we'll try them, and then those that are liked. Whereas the ones that come via email, it's just if we pick up the email and if it's at the right time.
Yeah. So kind of pitch them to the glossies now for Christmas is probably the main advice. I don't know whether the products have Sainsbury's racking or not. Do you recognise Tom Savano, Helena?
I don't, but we do have a regular monthly drinks page called The Measure, which is edited by Liz Stansfield on the team. I mean, I know PR often ask who should we send things to, but honestly, if you buy a copy of the magazine, it's all in there, bylines and masthead, etc. And we feature cocktails regularly. We've just done in our latest issue, we've got a whole 4-page feature on new cocktail recipes that were given to us by some of the kind of hippest cocktail bars in London. We do a lot on cocktails, and we're seeing increased interest in making cocktails. I think it's all part of that kind of date night, being at home special. That's quite a big trend for our audience.
Okay. I'll rattle through a couple more questions quickly. I'm just conscious we are coming to the end of time, and I don't want to hold on to our panelists unfairly. Ian Philpott says, how important is video from PRs these days? Any of you three like to answer that? How important is video?
Not important to me.
Okay.
Not important to me at all, no.
I'm just actually on that online content, we do get quite a lot of requests. We can't include any of it unless it's exclusive, just because it would clash on the search engine optimization stuff. But
in a pitching in email, if you do a link to a video just so the editor can see what the product looks like, that may be helpful, just to, help.
I'd just rather have an image. I don't need a video. Yeah, because it just, yeah.
Yeah, and we're all a bit bandwidth poor at the moment, aren't we? Yeah. Okay. Emily Cook says, how is the best way for PRs to pitch to you? Is it best to email, or are you happy for us to call? And I'm going to twin that with a question from Anne Lowe, the new communications marketing manager at Spice Kitchen. I'm a total newbie. What advice have you got for me? So, how should these people go about pitching in? Is it emails? Is it phone? Is it a response tweet, direct message?
For me, I'm going to go first, just to start it off. For me, it's email, always. I'm not going to pick up the phone to a number I don't know, I'm afraid. I'm just too busy. And if it's something I'm not interested in, I just don't have time to get back to. It's not that, it's nothing personal. It's just like Andrew said, we are swamped with emails, press releases. So yeah, it's not personal. It's just not right for us at that time.
Sam, what captures your interest?
Yeah, I just say send me an email. I'm happy to meet people for coffee once this is all over, but I probably try and do one a month. It's quite difficult to try and meet people lots and lots, but it's nice to get to know people. And then I just think email, because I don't give out my phone number really.
Yeah. Okay. I've got quite a lot of questions, people asking for contact details. I think what we'll do is just check back with you afterwards, and if you're happy for us to share them with our audience, that's fine. By the way, we ran at well over 80 PRs throughout this webinar, which has been absolutely great. And I'm going to end on a final question. I got this from a couple of people, but just some humorous thoughts, please, for people like Charlotte Brown at Leap for a PR. What is the best way, what is the best subject field in an email? So how to get your attention through a subject field. Any lovely examples? Any things that would really, really turn you off? Helena, would you like to have a think about that?
Okay. Do you know, it's really interesting. I can't give you any subjects off the top of my, thoughts off the top of my head. I know when I've got a generic email, there is just something in the tone. It's very bland, it's very catch-all, and they are the ones I'm less likely to read. If it asks me an interesting question, did I know some interesting fact? Have I tried this amazing new product? Wouldn't your readers like to know about it? Something that makes it pertinent to the title or to me as a journalist will always get my attention. Sorry, I can't be kind of more specific than that, but honestly, I go to my inbox every morning. There's emails from PRs who email me every day with a generic press release, and it's just delete, 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 delete. And it, I understand they're doing their job and that's what their client expects, but it's quite frustrating.
Yeah, you've got to communicate that this is a personalised message. Andrew, what will get you double-clicking on an email to read it in full?
One that starts with exclusive : and then something that's going to grab my attention, something that is new, interesting, something that I haven't heard before, something that perhaps relates, something I've experienced and said, oh, this happened to me recently, or I tried this recently, and now maybe there's a trend there.
Yeah.
But yeah, the offer of exclusive is the first thing, because then I know that email is being directed specifically to me, and I'm much more likely then to open it. I potentially might not if what comes after the colon is really dire and boring, but that's what I'd say.
So exclusive : selling cider to Australians or something like that.
Yes.
Or Ukrainians.
Or Ukrainians, exactly.
Sam, what would get your interest?
I agree with the others. I think if it's generic, it's kind of a bit, I'm a bit put off, but then I understand it's not easy to send out 400 emails that are personal. I think for me, it's if it just says what it is on the subject line. If I actually know what I'm about to click on, it's kind of useful. If I'm doing something about wine and I can see there's an email about wine, then I'll click on it. Whereas if I don't know what it is, I probably won't even open it because it just... Sorry.
So I was just saying one more point. The generic emails, I will read the subject line, but also it's not necessarily not worth sending, because sometimes I actually do use my inbox as sort of search function. So if often I'm asked by a senior editor to write about a subject because they've something that they've come across that's of interest. So what I will often do is I will then search my inbox to see if there's something relevant to that subject that I can then draw out. So I wouldn't say to PR don't send generic emails. From my perspective, I don't ever delete. My inbox is absolutely full, and often a lot of them are unread. But it's sort of like a database. It's like my own search function. Sorry to interrupt there.
No, that's a fair point.
No, that's absolutely great. So put in the subject field something about what the story is about, so it's going to pop up later. That's a really, really good point. Listen, I'm to our many viewers out there, I'm so sorry for not getting through all of our questions today. Keep the faith, because we will have more food editors along later this year. But I think this has been a wonderful session. So I'm very indebted to Andrew Ellson, to Sam Goldsmith, and to Helena Lang, our A-list lineup of journalists today. You've done a wonderful job. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our audience who's joined us today. Thank you to Ash Pearson and Ali Ware and the team back at the ranch who've done such a wonderful job. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you the next time. Thanks very much indeed.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.